filter in. Thank you, Sage. Or it's probably Carissa. Thank you, Carissa. Just making sure all our attendees get their audio working and getting into the webinar room. Okay. All right, I'll stop my share and I'll say hello to everybody. Welcome. My name is Jay McFarlan, and I am a research chair and board member at the Gateway Center of Excellence in Rural Health. And welcome to Season 5, Episode 8 of the virtual lecture series. So for today, March 4th, 2025, the topic is rural sport and recreation. But before we get into the topic, a little bit about Gateway. Gateway is a community-based not-for-profit that aims to promote the health and quality of life for rural residents through research, education, and communication. There are many benefits that you can gain from sport and recreation in general, besides just the active physical health, mental health. It's good for your heart, good for your brain. There's other benefits too, including the general sense of happiness you get from playing team sports in particular. And rural communities are often the places with thriving sport and rec cultures. And in this talk, we're going to review some of the research on rural sport and recreation and discuss some of the more specific examples. The speakers for today will be, we will first cover a case study example from the Opeongo Heritage Cup in Barry's Bay, the Township of Madawaska Valley, up in Northern Ontario. It's located on the unceded territory of the Omawinini or Algonquin people. The speakers today are Dr. Kyle Rich and David Shulist. Dr. Kyle is an associate professor at the Department for Sport Management at Brock University. Kyle's research has looked at the impact of policy, community, and inclusion or exclusion on experiences in sport, rec, and physical activity programming. This research has examined a variety of local, regional, and national programs and how they are implemented in both urban and rural contexts. David Shulist is a councillor at the Township of Madawaska Valley. In this role, he sits on the Barry's Bay Area Rec Committee, and he is the founding commissioner of the Opeongo Heritage Cup, the Nations Cup curling bonspiel at the Kilalo Curling Club, and the multicultural golf tournament at the Wolf Ridge Golf Club. So, final word of thanks to the attendees who are watching this. We offer certificates at the end of each semester for the Gateway Lecture Series for those with perfect attendance to recognize your commitment to and involvement with the lecture series. So if you have questions for our speakers today, please feel free to put them in the question and answer box or in the chat, and we will try to get to those at some point in the hour. Anyways, without further ado, I'll hand it over to Dr. Kyle and Dave to take us through sport and rec in rural communities.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm just going to share my slides here. And there you go. I think you can see that. Can you see my slides all right?
Yep, looks good.
Perfect.
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. So yeah, thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I've heard a lot about the lecture series, so I was really pleased and excited to get the invite. So we're going to talk today about rural sport and recreation. This is something that's near and dear to my heart, and it's been central to my research program for a while. So I'm excited to come here and have a room full of excited participants. I'm going to do my best to follow along with the chat as we go here, but please feel free to throw questions in the chat at any point. We'll make sure we get to them at some point, and we'll make sure we save some time for question and answer at the end. So just a little overview for what we're going to cover today. I'm going to give you my kind of brief introduction to sport and recreation in rural communities. I'll talk a little bit about the context in which this exists, so the context of sport policy and governance in Canada, and then give you a couple examples of some of the work that I've done over the past few years, some of the findings that we have. And I'm going to illustrate that with some of my own examples and the kind of implications that I think this work has for kind of the lived experiences of people who are organizing and advocating for sport and recreation in rural and northern and remote communities. And then I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Dave, and he's going to talk to us about sport and heritage development in the Opeongo Heritage Cup. And so I'm going to make sure I save some time for him, and then we'll make sure we leave lots of time for Q&A at the end. So to start, I want to do a little bit of an interactive activity here so you can get your fingers ready to type a response. But I want you to take a second and think about the place that you're from or the place that resonates with you. So whether that's, the small town that you're from, the small town that you live in now, or maybe a small town that you spent lots of time in, and think about some sport, recreation, or broader leisure activity that the people there do that you think is special. So not just a run-of-the-mill thing, but something special about the things that they do there. It could be, this could be an event. It could be a hockey tournament, like we're going to talk about later. Maybe it's a race that has a road race that has a specific theme or something funny and quirky about it. Maybe it's a festival they host every year. And then I want you to think about from there, how is that thing or that event or that activity, how is it related to the place? So why is it special because it's in that place? I think quite often these fun and interesting things that we do happen because of the people and the environment and the contexts in which they were developed. They don't just happen randomly. So this idea here, this connection between people and places is what I'm really interested in. And I always love hearing what people have as examples from the places that they're from. So if you have an example, if that made sense to you, if that resonated in some way, you can throw that in the chat. I'd love to see some of these examples and hear from you and know what you're actually thinking about. Oh, and I think I got one in the. Oh, cool! I got a question already, but you can throw those into the Q&A if you want, and I might come back to these as I move through. Okay, so to start you off with a little bit of context, I want to just kind of talk a little bit about the kind of context of sport policy and governance in Canada. So when we talk about sport policy in Canada, this is kind of the image that we cook up, right? We think about Sport Canada at the top, at the federal level. They make policy and set the general direction for what we think sport should do and could do, and then that gets passed on to national sport and recreation organizations. That gets then passed on to the provincial and territorial sport and recreation organizations, and then they go on to support the work of community sport organizations as well as municipal recreation organizations. And this is kind of a pretty simple but a neat and tidy way of thinking about how sport policy and governance works. But like most kind of policy contexts, things aren't quite so neat and tidy. If I was to draw up how I think the system works, this is kind of how I would illustrate it. So we don't only have those 4 levels of policymakers and policy that happens, and it doesn't flow neatly down those steps in the ladder. We also have 4 different levels of government who are all making policy that has real implications for the sport and recreation organizations and activities that happen in those places. We have a series of Indigenous-led sport and recreation organizations that exist, both at the national, provincial, and community levels. And these organizations, we use the metaphor of a double helix because they exist in parallel to and related to the settler sport structure in Canada. And then sport's also embedded in a variety of other institutions, like the legal regulations that set up how sport is and should operate, the health regulations that or the health kind of system that sets out the things that we want sport to achieve in terms of physical activity. And then an interesting thing about sport is we also have this level of organizations that are international or supranational that also make policy and decisions that have implications for the people on the ground who are engaging in these. So there's not a lot of like sectors or activities where a decision at a supranational level gets trickled down to the community level so quickly, right? If the International Ice Hockey Federation decides that we're going to play red line icing, very quickly the 5-year-olds playing hockey in Barry Bay are all of a sudden going to be playing red line icing, right? That's a pretty unique kind of context of sport that we're so connected in a big way. And so broadly, when I think about my research program, what I'm trying to do is clarify some of these relationships. So the relationships between these different organizations, how changes at one level impact changes at another. And then specifically for the purpose of this talk, thinking about how that looks in different communities. So different kinds of communities, organizations that operate in rural and urban places, or maybe remote and northern places, and how the experiences of the organizers in those communities varies across those different places. So in the next 15 minutes or so today, I want to talk about two of the kind of key questions that are driving my research and some of the stuff that I've worked on in the last few years. I also want to recognize that saw some of these examples coming in. So I've got memorial hockey tournaments. I've got a wake park in an open pit quarry. That's really interesting. That's a cool and interesting one. Hockey is the focus of recreation, the G2G trail. Thank you for these. These are great, and I might ask you to share a bit more about those in the end as we come to it. I'm going to continue here. So the two things that I want to talk to you a bit about today, first is how policy systems, so how broader policy systems impact rural sport and recreation organizations. And then the second one is how sport and recreation organizations contribute to rural development in those rural communities. So I'm going to take some time to talk through my work in these two areas, and I'm also going to illustrate these implications with one of my own examples. And so that example is one of the activities that I do. This would be my activity if I was putting this into the chat to share with all of you. And this is what we call family hockey. So I'm from Powassan, just outside of North Bay. And one of the fun and interesting things that we do is family hockey tournaments. So this year is the Trout Creek Family Hockey Tournament. These guys are all somewhat related to me, either directly or indirectly. And we play in hockey tournaments where we play against other families in the town. This tournament has a men's and women's division. They have a kids skills competition and a bunch of interesting activities like that. So I'm just going to introduce you to family hockey now in Trout Creek, specifically in the Trout Creek Community Center. And I'm going to come back to that to talk about some of these implications as I move through these examples. So first up, how do policy systems impact rural sport and recreation organizations? So one of the projects that I've worked on for the last few years has been really trying to map how provincial policy related to sport and recreation impacts sport development, and then what those implications are for organizations in different communities. So in the broader kind of sport development world, and particularly in Canada, we talk a lot about the policy at the national level. So we think about Sport Canada and national sport organizations and how they develop programs and the important work that they're doing to kind of achieve sport policy's objectives. And then we talk a lot about the community level as well. And so thinking about the experiences of organizers in community sport organizations and those grassroots organizations who actually deliver the programs. But we're kind of conspicuously light on the role of provincial policy and provincial organizations within that system. Partially, this is because Canada is a pretty unique context in that we have huge regions. So our provinces are much larger than we would see in, for example, a European country. And the implications of that distance are much bigger as well. So we don't travel easily across regions for competitions the way that you can when you live in a very small region or a small state in a European country. So it's a pretty unique thing to have such strong regional implications and jurisdictional issues for the Canadian sports system. So in this project, and I've included these QR codes here if you're interested in reading the papers about this, you can scan those and check them out. You can also, I have a link to my website at the end if you want to see more. I'm happy to share any of these with you. But in this project, we mapped out the policy over the last 25 years that the province of Ontario has made that has implications for sport and recreation. And I've kind of boiled these down to four kind of important points here that I think are worth considering and that I think would be kind of relevant for rural sport and recreation organizers. The first was amalgamation. So the amalgamations of 2000 and 2001 had huge implications and huge impacts on communities, and particularly in rural communities. One of the interesting kind of themes that's come out of this work has been that many rural places are still dealing with these amalgamations kind of uniquely in terms of their sport and recreation departments or particularly facilities. And so that's something that I think we're starting to feel the impacts of even more and more now that we're feeling the crunch of budgets post-COVID, as well as just generally administratively in trying to run municipalities. Relatedly, during the same kind of policy imperatives in that time saw the downloading of responsibilities from the provincial level to municipalities, and often municipalities didn't have the capacity or necessarily could easily access the skills required to do some of that kind of regulatory and management work. And then in Ontario, I believe it was 2017, we had a defunding of the regional sport body. So we used to have an organization at the provincial level who oversaw all sport organizations and advocated on their behalf. So Ontario Sport that was connected to all of the provincial sport organizations and advocated on behalf of them. So that was defunded in 2017, and we haven't had anyone really advocating for the sport sector in that way. And then finally, we've had changing administrative arrangements. So different levels or different governments of all political stripes have not really, it doesn't seem like they're sure what to do with sport and recreation within their administration. So in the 90s and early 2000s, sport and recreation sat with tourism. In 2010, it was moved to the Ministry of Health Promotion. Then Toronto was awarded the Pan Ams and Pan American Games. So the same government moved it out of health promotion and into tourism and culture. Then the latest Conservative government moved it into a ministry called Sport, Recreation, and Tourism Industries, I believe, or Culture Industries. And then now as of last summer, we have a standalone Ministry of Sport. So Ontario is the only province in Canada that has a standalone ministry for sport. We're still not quite sure what that's going to look like and what the roles and responsibilities of that ministry are going to be. But in any case, we have one. So I'll be following it closely. But in talking to people in the sector, what they say is that this makes it really difficult for them to know what sport is supposed to be doing, whether it's supposed to be promoting physical activity or driving tourism or creating cultural engagement in communities. And they described it as kind of playing in the dark with these provincial ministries and not really knowing what sport is supposed to do. So when we think about the implications of these kind of shifting provincial policies related to sport and recreation, I'm going to come back to the Trout Creek Community Center here. So this year, it was announced that based on an engineer's inspection, that the Trout Creek Community Center was basically at the end of its usable life, and that the municipality was facing some tough decisions around what should happen. And this is not a new issue. This has been a very intense political issue in the municipality since amalgamation, because what the kind of forced amalgamations of these municipalities did was created a huge duplication of facilities. So the municipality of Powassan, what is now the municipality of Powassan, was the amalgamation of what was formerly Powassan, Trout Creek, and South Hemsworth. After amalgamation, this meant that municipality of about 3,400 people has 2 arenas, 3 baseball fields, 2 tennis courts, 2 parks, a pool, like many of these things that they really don't have the tax base to support based on any kind of calculations. So that is a big burden for a municipality to bear and to upkeep, right? It's a lot of money to upkeep facilities. It's a heavy cost on taxpayers in order to maintain those things. And so this is kind of the culmination of years of kind of issues here. And that's something that I think is not unique to the municipality of Trout Creek or municipality of Powassan and the former town of Trout Creek. But it's a really important one, and it's one that really impacts people's well-being in their community. So you've got some examples here. I know that I shouldn't be doing my research on Facebook, but I thought there was some good quotes here that really kind of summarize how people are aware of this and people understand that this was kind of years of policy decisions that have led to this kind of current situation. And they're really fired up about it, and it's really interesting. And I'm gonna come back to that in a minute. So my second question here, how do sport and recreation organizations contribute to rural community development? And this, gives recognition to the fact that these organizations, whether it's a sport organization that runs a league on a weekly basis, or organizers who organize community events and festivals and bring people together around these events, they play a really important role in small communities and bringing people out and engaging them, bringing them out in their community, developing relationships, developing a shared sense of community in those ways. And so I think that these events and programs offer a variety of opportunities to contribute to community development. And I think that different rural communities pick up these activities and use them in different ways that suit their needs. And I've over the past few years worked to kind of map some of those different examples. And Dave's going to talk about a really awesome example of one of those that I think is quite unique and specific to his region. So I'm not going to spend too much time kind of breaking these out, but I want to recognize that this exists across a variety of different dimensions of community life. So of course we have, tourism and economic development. If we look into the strategic plans of some communities in the north, they're really leaning into this one to keep their arenas, right? If we have an arena, we can host hockey tournaments that will fill beds in the hotel, that will sell meals at the restaurants, and this is a really important economic driver in the community in the winter months. But in some of my own work, when I worked with the municipality of Powassan, we developed a summer day camp program. And one of the interesting things that came out of that we hadn't necessarily planned for was some of the people who were using that really, really regularly told us how it was such an important childcare option in the community because their affordable childcare is really hard to come by, and people need that as an option, whether it's in a permanent way for the whole summer, or it's just, the parent who's at home all summer with the kid and wanted a break and wants to dump their kid at day camp so they can go have fun and do something different for the week. So some really important other things that we can engage in there that aren't necessarily expected. Dave's going to speak a little bit about cultural development or cultural engagement. And I want to take a note here to also recognize that sport and recreation is often a place where people in rural and remote communities are building relationships between different groups, particularly between Indigenous communities and settler communities. Sport and recreation is one of those places where people come together and engage in shared kind of collective activities and build important relationships. And I think we can't downplay the fun aspect, right? These are activities that bring people together, build relationships, improve our well-being, and help us develop a sense of community that's really important for engaging people in different ways. So to come back to my example here, the following these kind of announcements that were made when they're going to close down the arena, a whole group of organizers in the community really mobilized around an application to the Craft Hockeyville competition. So this is a competition every year. I'm sure many of you have probably heard of it, where they run a big kind of rally competition where people from the community share their stories about their local arena, and they can win up to $250,000 in arena upgrades. So I will recognize that that is only a drop in the bucket in terms of what they would actually need to fix that facility or to build a new one. And there are certainly problematics with having to rely on a competition to rebuild some of these facilities. But what I found was so interesting here is the way that people felt so strongly and were so invested in the facility and the things that were happening that they mobilized and they wanted to share their stories and rally support for this facility. So I did go back and played in the tournament this year, and it was really interesting to see all the people really buzzing about this Hockeyville competition and getting people on board with sharing their photos and sharing some of their stories and bringing the issue to a kind of a broader audience in hopes that they might be able to raise some of the money for their facilities. So I think this just recognizes the importance of that storytelling and mobilizing for collective action around these things, because I think that these rural sport and recreation, whether they're programs or facilities or just the stories we tell in communities, they have a really powerful function where they can mobilize a lot of support for people and really drive change in some of these communities in positive ways. So that brings me to my end of my section here. I'm going to pass it over to Dave now. Just by way of segue, I'll say that I was connected with Dave. I believe it was 2018. I reached out and got in touch with him because I was, building out my repertoire of case studies on interesting rural hockey events, and the Opeongo Heritage Cup was one that was high on my list. And now I feel very fortunate to have been able to build a relationship with Dave, and I'm so pleased that he was willing to join us today and talk a little bit about his event. So I will turn that over to him, and then we will see you all again shortly for some question and answers in a few minutes.
Hello out there, we're on the air. Anyway, thanks for the invite. Yeah. So anyway, my name is David Martin Shulist, and also known in my community as Johnny Cashup. And I know Dr. Rich was wondering, wow, Johnny Cash, who's this guy? Anyway, I'm known as Canada's Kashubian Braveheart. I am a fifth-generation Kashubian Canadian, a descendant of Kashubian ancestry. I am a Kashubian speaker. It is my first language. I am labeled in my community as a Kashubian historian because of my knowledge of our local history. I have visited the Kashubian homeland in Europe 14 times. I'm a recipient of the Ontario Heritage Award, Governor General of Canada Caring Canadian Award, Governor General Sovereign Medal and Diploma of Merit from the Kashubian Pomeranian Association in Kashebe, Stalin Medal from the Pomeranian Student Club from the University of Gdańsk in the capital city of my ancestral homeland. Boy, am I ever buttering myself up, am I? Anyway, also Canadian Ethnic Media Lifetime Achievement Award under journalism, under print category. I was recognized for publishing a Kashubian Canadian history book entitled Discovering Kashubia Europe, the Fatherland of My Kashubian Ancestors. Under journalism podcast category, I was recognized for creating and producing a podcast show called The Johnny Kashup Show, where I gave a voice to the Canadian Kashup people. Under community engagement, founding president of the Wilno Heritage Society for building Canada's Kashup Heritage Park in Wilno, Ontario, Canada's first Kashubian settlement dating back to 1858. Under multiculturalism, for using sports to promote local heritage and founding commissioner of the Opeongo Heritage Hockey Tournament in Barry's Bay, Ontario, the Nations Cup of Curling, and multicultural golf tournament in Kildu, Ontario. So just to let you know, I am also a sports nut. I love hockey, I love curling and golf. I'm not very good at these sports, but I enjoy playing them. It keeps me off the street and keeps me healthy. Sometimes my wife loves it when I get out of the house a bit. Now, in high school, I somehow was selected Athlete of the Year in 69, 70, so now you know how old I am. In 2009, I was selected as Olympic torchbearer to represent the county of Renfrew. Now, in 2006, my passion for sports and my passion for heritage collided. As you can see, I've already covered my heritage. I almost obsessed with it, as you can see that. Now, use the game of hockey, Canada's game, and my love for heritage, where I created the Opeongo Heritage Cup hockey tournament on the last weekend of March. I used the name Opeongo because that is the road that brought our ancestors to our area in the 1800s. It is the descendants of the first pioneers who came up the Opeongo that qualified to play in the tournament. You do not have to be born in the area, but you must be connected to the first pioneers. As you know, Canada is a land of many nations and has opened its doors to all people in the world, and it has become a model to the rest of the world. Multiculturalism is the cornerstone of Canada, and needless to say, hockey is our game. Our community is connected to 4 strong nations: the Kashubians, the Irish, the Germans, and the Algonquins, our First Nation people. As you can see in back of me, I'm pretty proud of those 4 heritages. Very strong here. We are playing on Algonquin native land. I'm very proud of it. You could say that our event is the original 4 Nations face-off. The NHL did a great job spinning off of our event, but we own it. Make that perfectly clear. We own the 4 Nations face-off. We have 3 divisions. The Opeongo Heritage Cup, where our finest men play. Then we have the Opeongo Heritage Trophy, where our finest women play. The Opeongo Heritage Bowl, where our gentlemen play when they no longer can keep up with the young guns. Now we have 11 teams in this tournament, 3-day tournament. Because you do not have to be born in the area, our event has become a homecoming for many who had to leave because of work, to university, to college, education, and so on. We have folks from across North America, US and Canada coming to play here. We even got some people from Fort McMurray coming from the US side. Again, you don't have to be born here, you have to have connections here. So that it has become a homecoming. It has also become an economic force where businesses are benefiting all weekend. Hotels, restaurants, stores, all happy to see customers at a time when the business is slow. Approximately 70 businesses sponsor the event. The businesses are definitely engaged. Now, we make this event friendly to families where we keep the cost down and only charge $30 for the weekend, which they can see 17 games in 3 days. Children under 12 are free. Our motto is proud to be Canadian and proud of our ancestral roots. Hockey is our vehicle and diversity is our fuel. Questions?
Awesome. Thanks, Dave.
Okay.
I had a quick takeaway slide here, but I think I like that segue better, and we can jump right into the questions. People, I think you'll have to put your questions into the chat, and then I can see them here, and I can relay them on to Dave if you have them for Dave. I did have one on my part already. So the question is, could you please explain further how two communities could afford two arenas, but now that combined, the same number of taxpayers can no longer afford them? So yeah, great question. I believe what had happened is the one arena, the smaller arena, was previously an agricultural building, and it was being run completely as kind of a nonprofit, so it wasn't being run through the municipality. But then the municipality, after amalgamation, assumed or like absorbed the building and was taking care of the capital, basically all capital, so the infrastructure piece. And so the nonprofit part was still running programming in the facility and the what happened in the building, but the municipality had taken responsibility for it. So it wasn't, I think, previously part of the tax base, but they were. They had assumed it in that way and taken it on. And again, I think this was likely wrapped up in the kind of process of amalgamation and having to become one community and seeing those as being run differently and not in the same way. But yes, thank you for that question. And then we got a question for you, Dave.
Okay.
So they're looking for a little bit more info on how Kashubi heritage is being played out in the community. So is it seen as historical or more appealing to older generations, or is it alive and young among the young people? So yeah, what does that look like a little bit? I think you could probably give us a little bit more of the Kashubi story because it's so interesting.
Yeah, it is and all that. And what's interesting too is that we still have the language after being here 165 years. Now the next generation is not embracing it because media, everything is in English, newspapers or whatever, social media. But the main thing here is the identity is strong, like and most Canadians, whenever you're talking to a Canadian, they're always proud of the heritage that they're connected to, right? So they'll say, in my case here, a Kashubian Canadian, then there could be a French Canadian, could be a German Canadian, and so on. I know in our community, we have those four strong cultures and so on and identities, and they're very proud of it. And this is why we use that slogan is that proud to be Canadian and proud of our ancestral roots. So so every Canadian is connected to some culture, in could be in Europe, could be in Asia, could be anywhere, right? So and the young are embracing it absolutely. It is most of the young that are playing in this tournament, and they are very proud to represent. It's like they may be living in Canada, they're playing the game of hockey in Canada, but they are representing their ancestry when they're on the ice. They proudly will have their, like in this case, the Kashubian Griffin as the emblem on their shirt, just like we have our Canadian maple leaf and so on. Same with the Germans have the eagle and so on, the shamrock for the Irish. So no, it is stronger now. Not saying it's all because of the hockey game, or the hockey tournament, but it definitely has inspired them to be really proud of their ancestor roots.
Yeah, and I know I can say when I was there as well, one thing that I clocked and I was thinking about was the people who were talking about those things in the arena during the event, right? People were sharing stories. There was like people who were someone else's first time. I wasn't the only one who was there for the first time, and I was being able to pick up the stories secondhand, just sitting in the stands and hearing people tell the stories. So it's a really important kind of stimulus for those kind of storytelling as well.
Absolutely.
We got another one here for you, Dave. Question is, how many teams are in the tournament? And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how that evolved. Like, did it start small and get bigger? Did you always have women's and men's? Did you always have the different age divisions? I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, we started off with the three. The Algonquins were not part of the first one, but the second year, and we only had the men. We just wanted to see how and feel it out. How is it going to go? And all of a sudden, 2007, the lady said, "No, we want in." And then we have a division, like I said earlier, for gentlemen. So as soon as you turn 30. Say I'm too slow to play against these 18-year-olds, 19 or 20-year-olds. Then we have a 40-year-old, 40 plus division, and also 50 and plus. So, but we have four gentlemen's team. We call it the open to any caliber of play, and this is where those youngsters come in there. And then we have a women's division. We have four teams, again, those four cultures. And the gentlemen's, we only have the Irish against the Kashubians. Just not enough players yet from those other two, but eventually it probably will be. But that means we'll probably have to be playing at midnight.
Cool. Awesome. I'm going to go back up to the top here. I had this question off the hop, so diverting a little bit from what we talked about, but question here is about community gardening. So asking if if there's research into gardening for recreation and fitness. Yeah, there's actually, so I'm pretty sure the Gateway is connected to the folks at Waterloo, the University of Waterloo. I believe Troy Glover there, he had a bunch of really interesting research on community gardens and some of the more, I think, of the social dynamics of community gardens, the way of bringing people together. I'd be very happy to pull some of that research and share it, or even make a connection to Troy if you'd like. But I think that's there is certainly some stuff out there. I think there's really interesting stuff on access to gardens. So I think they're exceptionally popular when they when they come out, and so people are always looking for space and jostling for space. And that some of the trouble is managing that and making them spaces that people feel like they can engage with and have access to, and that they aren't necessarily exclusive spaces in that way. I had a follow-up question to the tax-based question. I suspect that this is something that different places are feeling right now. I know I had a conversation with some of the folks at Gateway, and we were talking about Goderich. I believe there's a question about the arena in Goderich as well, and the future of that arena. And I think I'm not sure I have solutions, but I think the issue is that a lot of these facilities were built kind of in the baby boomer era, where growth was happening. We were investing in the welfare state. We were investing in all these kind of recreation and community services, and now a lot of these facilities have gotten quite old. And depending on the kind of size or the growth that's happened in a municipality, they don't always have the tax base or the reserve to build a new facility, and they're relying on maybe a large scale grant from a different level of government in order to try to get those done. So I think I'm not sure it's a solution, but I think one of the key issues there is that kind of thinking back to that idea of mobilizing people and getting people engaged in it. I think people need to know what those facilities cost and what they cost to upkeep, and then how we need to use them, and also the many things that they do in communities, right? So often local arenas and community centers are also your emergency centers, right? Or your emergency action plans that you have in your communities all rely on having these kind of communal spaces where that can be activated when they need to be. community. And so I do think they play a lot of really important roles in communities, but I'm not sure that everyone is necessarily aware of that, right? And aware of the many different things that they can do. So I think that education and kind of like mobilizing people around those things, understanding what community facilities do and what they can do is an important part of that. I'm not sure unless we see a kind of major shift at one of the levels of government and a major investment in some of these things that we're going to end up saving or replacing all of those facilities. I think that's a big, tough kind of question. But I think there are lots of examples of municipalities doing interesting things to try to build support or raise funds and do some different things around that. So not sure. I think that question was Melissa. I'm not sure I completely answered your question, but tried to give a little bit of context there. Got a question from Sage on here, asking about intergenerational participation in sports activities. This is a really interesting one. So the question is, do rural communities have more intergenerational participation? I'm not sure that I have data on intergenerational participation in sport. I don't think that's something a lot of people are doing research on, but I know certainly in some of the events that I've looked at, including the Heritage Cup, the intergenerational piece is a really interesting thing that comes through in a lot of cases. So the family tournament in Trout Creek, the Heritage Cup, these are all examples where there's kind of opportunities for different generations to participate and engage in different ways. And I think that comes from the idea of trying to make events community events and events for everyone, where everyone can participate in. So it's certainly a trend that I've noticed in these different events. I know I can say in the family hockey tournament in Trout Creek, there was one year where my cousin, his parents, so the grandma and the grandpa, both played in the men's and women's division. Him and his wife played in the men and women's division, and then their kids both participated in the skills competition. So they had three generations that were all kind of actively participating, not just in the event as like a spectator, but in the hockey portion of the event, which I thought was something that's really interesting and kind of special. Dave, I'm not sure if you want to comment on that. Was that an intentional thing that you guys were working on in the Heritage Cup?
I'll tell you something too, Dr. Rich, is that the generations and so on. So let's say it's in 2006, there's a man playing for a team and could be in his 30s. All of a sudden now they're in their 50s, and their son or their daughter's playing in this tournament. There is now three generations, right? So you could have a grandson or a granddaughter playing in this tournament. They're all those kids that were out there running around in the arena. They're going to someday play in this hockey tournament. They're waiting for them to get it. Well, as soon as you're 15, you can start playing, right? As long as you have a letter from your parents to say that you can do this. So really, it's like in this tournament, you could have a 50-year-old grandfather, and then son is playing in the open, and then or in the 30 and over, and then you have the grandson playing in the open at 18 or 19 or something. So this what's happening, since we started. So.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting kind of dynamic, and I think it's a really special one in a lot of these events.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Do we have any other question coming in here? I think, yeah, that's a really interesting thing in the small town sport and recreation context, I think, is the way people come together kind of across different ways, right? Sometimes we have these unlikely combinations of groups and people who come work together and play. And I think that's something that makes stuff work, that gets people engaged, and people see it not only as for someone else, but for all of us, and engaging in that way. Let me see what I've got going on here. Okay, here's one. What suggestions or resources are there for including newcomers to participants? So either newcomers to Canada or just newcomers to your area. This is a great question, and one that's actually really, really pertinent right now. With the last few years of having the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot Project, we've seen kind of flows of new people moving into rural and northern places in ways that we hadn't before. And that's something that I think a lot of municipalities, were not necessarily prepared for, because it's fine. It's one thing to welcome people in a we have somewhere for you to live. It's another to integrate people into the kind of social fabric of your communities. And often, in these smaller places, a lot of these sport and recreation organizations and programs actually rely on, these kind of legacy volunteers who have been coming out forever and organizing these things and pulling things together just by, word of mouth, right? You call up your friends, the same people do the same roles every year, and things work really smoothly because it's a well-oiled machine. So if you're a newcomer to a community, whether that you're new to the country or just new to a municipality, sometimes it can be really hard to one, even know what's going on if it all happens by word of mouth on the phone, and then two, feel comfortable showing up with a group of people who have done the same thing together for years and years. And even if they may be very friendly and welcoming, it's not necessarily the easiest kind of social context to break into. So I think a really important thing for municipalities and for local organizers to think about is, make extending invitations, searching out new people, bringing the new people in your community into your programs and into your events, helping them understand, why you do it, what it is that you do, and what's great about it. And that is, I think that's a really important kind of first step. I've actually had a couple students who have done their research projects on this topic, so understanding, what the experiences of new people in rural communities look like, and they found some really interesting stuff. I think it's important to recognize that small communities, there's many pros and there's many cons, and people who are new to the community are always trying to figure out what the challenges are and what the opportunities are, and trying to navigate those things in those ways. So sometimes things that we're just used to living with or not thinking about, like, a lack of access to transportation, is something that we've figured out how to work with and use. And for new people, that sometimes isn't as easy to navigate. So it's not just getting an invitation to an event, but finding a way to get there and ensuring that you have access to transportation to get there. Some of those kind of issues that are really important to think about. So I think building those relationships and making invitations are really important one, and finding ways to integrate people into different parts of sport and recreation programs. Did you have anything to add to that one, Dave?
No, I think you covered it very well, sir.
Thank you. So I've got some more here. A question: what about music and dance? So fiddle playing among Irish and Scottish settlers. Are there other musical or arts-based things that happened? That so I know you've got some fiddling and step dancing stuff in Barry's Bay, right, Dave?
Yeah, that's a good one. I know there was a couple of turns that we did, opening ceremonies. We had the Caships, the Irish, and that playing fiddle. The Algonquins make the biggest, how would you say, impact on the drums and the whole thing. So they'll set themselves up on the center ice and jam away, I guess you'd call it, or beat the drums. And they're such a big part of our community, and we got to realize that we're playing on their native soil and so on. This year, what I want to do, I was approached by the Algonquin community, and they say they would like to open up the tournament with someone from their community to sing "O Canada" in the Algonquin language, and I go, wow. Please, I would just love this. That just would be absolutely perfect, Nadia. So, and yeah, so the definitely music has been part of our event, especially in our opening event and so on. But this year we're going to try and honor some of our honorary captains. Like every team picks an honorary captain. Usually they are elders, people that have done something in the community, hockey related, sports related, community related, so on. And we're going to then make a little hoopla at the start and honoring them. We're also going to have the Minor Hockey Association, some of the 10 or 11-year-olds, they're going to also come to Center Ice. And when you've got let's say, an Irish gentleman and an Irish lady in Irish hockey jerseys, we're also going to have these children from minor hockey holding in this case for them, an Irish flag, right? We're going to do it like the Four Nations face-off, right? So they actually did give us a good idea. So this kind of stuff. So we try to do as much traditional stuff as we can, still realizing that we are Canadian and we're proud of it, and especially today.
Awesome. Another thing that I loved about your event, Dave, is the food in the snack bar. So you have the four cultures represented in the food at the arena as well. I thought that's such a creative and interesting way to pull that together.
Yeah, and people love cultural food. Absolutely, yeah. So.
Awesome. Okay, so we're getting close to our time here, but I think we got one more. So question here from Jay: what are some of the most creative ways we've seen aged buildings being repurposed? So things like arenas, community centers, and things. That's a great question. We were chatting a little bit about this on one of our prep calls. I think, what the kind of trend that I would say is that buildings are being repurposed to be more multi-purpose, I would say. So not only an arena, but arenas that or community hubs, they often call them. So things that have multi-purpose spaces. The example we were talking about, it's now called 250 Clark Street in Powassan. So that was the former school, and then the school was purchased by the municipality, and they moved the municipal offices into the school. But then there was also a gym, so they have a gymnasium space, and it had been things in between. So there's now a fitness center there, but then there's also meeting rooms, there's recreational spaces, there's different things that can happen. And I think there was a real kind of push on some of the infrastructure money for a while in creating these community hubs as opposed to individual one-off facilities. I know I've seen examples of other ones as well where, a Legion then becomes a community center, and there are different kind of things that you can do with that, or libraries that also serve as different things as well. So I think the kind of consolidation of some of those different things into one building instead of having them standalone separate buildings like they may have been in the past is generally the trend or the interesting creative stuff that I'm seeing. But I think that will look different in every community, based on the resources they have, the kind of organizations that are happening, and what they need, or what the kind of key priorities are for them. Dave, did you have any examples of those? You guys have a new arena in Barry's Bay, right?
Yeah, Dr. Rich, I just want to elaborate on a little bit more on this here, because I'm on the tennis committee too, right? We have a tennis court and so on, and it does need a little repair and so on. And so we're always looking for money at the municipal level, right? So, and the government is not all that fancy about saying, we're going to give money just for a tennis court. They would like to see other things like pickleball integrated into that same facility, right? So that multi sports here, right? So yes, absolutely. Then all of a sudden there's money available there, right? And of course we get a little bit of flack from the tennis people, say, "Oh my God, taken away." But you know what they have to realize is that there's other interest in the community. Instead of building a pickleball court and separate from it can be in the same structure, right? So.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think that's taken us to about 50 minutes. So it was wonderful to chat with everyone. I've got my link to my website there. You can grab my email there if you'd like. I'm sure Dave's also willing to take questions if you got questions specific to the Heritage Cup. But I'll just say thank you all so much for joining. It was wonderful to talk with you, and I'll pass it back to Jay to close things off.
That's great. Thank you, Kyle, and thank you, Dave, both. I think there are a lot of small towns that are all having the same conversations around the community center, the old arena, and how this aging infrastructure is is that needed to be replaced or repurposed. And so thank you for answering that question, Kyle, and Dave, about how your own communities are repurposing and rethinking what they can do. Some of the more creative things that I've seen just around this area of Ontario, in the Zurich Arena in Zurich, Ontario. The old arena was repurposed to was a paintball arena, and now it's become a skateboard park. So that's just one example of something that's unique to that community that you can't find it anywhere else, and it becomes really a tourist destination for a larger geography beyond the small town of Zurich, Ontario. That's just one example that sticks out. And I think one of the key factors, though, is that Zurich also built a new arena. So they still have that community place that the community can go to. And that's, I think, really kept that small rural town full of energy and still going. Anyways, we could talk for a lot longer about this, so we do have to wrap it up, though. So a huge thank you again to Dave and Kyle. If you have further interest in this topic, you can check out the website there that Kyle put on the screen. We'd also like to thank our sponsors. Ooh, I gotta get the sponsor slide up. Let me share my screen. It's very important I share the screen for this part.
Very important.
Yeah.
Sponsors.
Very important to thank the sponsors. Okay. So a big thank you, because without them, this lecture series is not possible. So McGee Motors in Goderich, Hurontel, Lighthouse Money Management in Goderich, DeJager Town Square IDA Pharmacy in Goderich, Zehrs Goderich, CIBC Wealth Management, Libro Credit Union, and Tucker Smith Communications. Coming up next on April 1st, April Fool's Day, will be Dr. Ken Milne talking about medical myths. For those familiar with Dr. Milne, he is the associate professor at Western University, and also a bit of a celebrity in the podcast world with the Skeptic's Guide to Emergency Medicine podcast. He's also a Gateway Research Chair of Rural Medicine. And we also want to say that Gateway is a nonprofit organization with charitable status, and we greatly appreciate and welcome any support we receive. So if you are interested in donating, please visit gatewayruralhealth.ca and click that donate button. But thank you also especially to our attendees for tuning in. It's because of you that we do this. We provide this as a part of our research, education, and communication to the community. Anyways, thank you for tuning in. Thank you to our panelists, and we'll see you next time.
See you on the flip side.